Hey everybody, it's Liz from eComEngine. I've got Chris McCabe and Leah McHugh with me from eCommerceChris. Say hi everybody. So we've done videos together about compliance issues in the past, and there are more and more things happening in the seller space. So we're going to start doing more regular videos about compliance issues, things that come across Chris's desk and Leah's desk in terms of sellers who have gotten in trouble with Amazon. And they're going to give you advice on how to not get in trouble. And when I know how to not get you in trouble, I'll give you advice on that too. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that these folks can see your beautiful faces. But tell me what's going on today, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and we're going to talk a lot about best practices over the weeks and months ahead, because we see a lot of compliance issues that are avoidable if people are educating themselves on how policy is being enforced and what they're doing wrong. I mean, for today, ASIN variation, misuse or abuse, or just mistakes that people are making when they create variations. We're seeing a lot of suspensions for this, as we see for lots of different kinds of listing violations. Leah can attest to.
Yeah, there's been a huge influx
how many
in the last couple of months.
Well, just the mistakes that are avoidable, and also many sellers tell us, they start by telling us, we know we're doing these right. We don't understand what the warning's from. We don't know why we're suspended. And Leah is here to tell you that she looks at the flat files, if they have them, which you'll elaborate on.
Yes.
She looks almost, I don't even know if I can say inevitably every time, but just about every time they're not done correctly.
And this is probably the only suspension type where we never have somebody know what they're doing wrong. Like in other suspension types, some people don't know what they've done, and some people are like, yes, we did this. This is the only one where they consistently think that they're doing it correctly. And
then
they're
she
not.
looks, she does the deep dive. I mean, I start off usually with the first touch conversation about how did this happen. There's a lot of, it's not so much that Amazon suspended me and I don't know why. We hear that all the time. They actually went through the policy. They went through how they're doing it. Maybe they went through their flat files and they still say, I know I did these all correctly, so Amazon made a mistake.
And it can be a difficult one to diagnose, mostly because Amazon likes to correct the problem before they tell you about it.
Right.
Which is where it's very important to have flat files, because if you don't have those flat files, sometimes it's impossible for me to even find the exact problem. Unless it's a systemic problem, which it often is, I can identify it from other listings. But the flat files are really key to this, because it gives you that paper trail of what you've done. And it also makes it a lot easier to fix this. For example, if you have to delete all of your listings in order to get your account back, it's a lot easier to re-upload them if you have a flat file, as opposed to manually uploading 40,000 listings or however many listings you have.
Right. I mean, on the one hand, you want to say delete everything, because if you appeal and Amazon finds in their own random search that you've got other ASINs that were improperly created, they will reject your appeal automatically and go back to you, and you might not even know why they rejected it. So to avoid that hassle, you want to make sure everything's deleted on the account, but don't delete everything until you have somebody like Leah or somebody who can do a full diagnostic know what you did in the first place, because obviously that goes into the root cause
and
of your POA.
It sounds drastic to delete all of your listings, but if you're suspended for ASIN variation misuse, you don't have the ability to edit listings. Right. So the only way that you're able to correct those listings until you're reinstated is to delete them. And Amazon isn't just looking at the ones they warned you about, they're looking at all of your ASINs for the same mistake. So if you say, I have corrected all my listings, and they find a random ASIN that you haven't sold in 5 years that's incorrect in your catalog, they won't reinstate your account.
That's a common, maybe not 5 years, but that's a common mistake, is to think, oh, I just deleted these 2 ASINs, I should be good to go. If they find other misuse of variations on other listings and their spot search, then they'll reject the POA.
A lot of people have the habit of zeroing out their inventory instead of deleting ASINs from their catalog.
Important point.
And don't do that. Just if you're not selling it, delete it.
Zeroing it out is a neutral thing to do. It's not, they're looking for definitive action, and that doesn't show them that you've done anything really. It's the same as people who say, I'll never sell this brand anymore, and then they zero it out. It looks like they're just going to go back to selling the brand once they're reinstated. So we just find there's a lot of misunderstanding of this. Some people don't understand the policy at all.
In fairness, the policy is very confusing.
Right. I mean,
let's talk a little bit about the policy. What exactly is the policy, and how are people inadvertently violating the policy?
So it's not as clear cut as some other policies because there's multiple ways that you can do it. One we see a lot of is misusing ASIN variation type. So maybe having something that the variation type is size, but it actually is different by color. Like they've just chosen the wrong kind of variation for what they're selling. Also, selling things that are too different as variations. So something that is different by size and color is fine, but if it also is maybe made out of a different material, then that shouldn't be in a variation relationship. That needs to be a separate listing. We've been seeing a lot of issues with bundles at the moment. People don't necessarily realize that bundles need to be treated differently from other ASINs, and bundles actually can't be a part of a variation relationship, which is something we're seeing more and more of.
Yeah. Bundles, I mean, and then, there's a variety of mistakes people make around bundles in general, just about like, oh, this is my branded product, but I'm bundling it with a different brand.
There are specific bundle guidelines that you need to follow, and it's specific to the listing content as well as how you're uploading them. So again, it really isn't a clear-cut answer because there are like 5.
Somebody with a listing variation problem. I'm calling right now. That's okay.
Thought I closed that.
So, what are ways that, how do people avoid this situation altogether? And then how could they correct their mistakes that they might not know that they've made without getting suspended or getting a scary letter from Amazon? Like, how can people get out in front of this?
Reviewing your listings. People change listings all the time. Generally speaking, you're not the only person on an ASIN. But if you're listing against an ASIN, you're responsible for that content regardless of who contributed it. So a lot of people list an ASIN and never look at it again.
Right.
And you need to be regularly reviewing your listings and checking them against policy. This policy hasn't changed. They just weren't enforcing it before.
Well, I think some people are delegating this to a member of their staff who maybe they don't have a tight...
Or different members of staff.
Well, different people who are touching the listings, just like, this is our listing creation person, and they're not thinking in terms of compliance steps or specialists in compliance reviewing it with that person, or even developing an internal SOP that makes sense for... I mean, maybe they just think it's a minor violation, and if they get slapped on the wrist, they can just change the variation and that's the end of it. And they're not anticipating an actual suspension to come from it. But people are getting suspended for it as much now as they were, and when we first started taking on these types of cases.
I mean, there are also third-party services who aren't necessarily doing things incorrectly, but if you're handing it off to a third-party service, assuming that everything's fine and not checking it yourself, I mean, errors could be made very easily. And again, other people are contributing to those listings. So it's just a matter of like regularly reviewing your listings and checking it with compliance in mind. So, I mean, unfortunately, the policy is spread out over like 10 different policy pages.
Right.
But
I mean, it's hard to track it. But even last week, we had a seller who said, well, I only have 2 or 3 of these. I've got thousands of listings. I've only got 4. Like, they kept quantifying it with me, And, happy ending, they got reinstated, of course, but don't come from that perspective of, well, there's only a few of these errors and errors happen and that's just life on Amazon. I mean, that's not the way. If they flag these listings and look at them, they're going to have to take an action against you, and you don't want it to be the worst kind of action.
So
that's what I tell people all the time is just because you don't understand terms of service doesn't mean you're not expected to understand terms of service.
Right.
You sign on the bottom line when you create a seller account. It's your job to, you can't in your defense say, oh, I didn't know, because I mean you have to.
So the first things I normally check is things that should be deleted that have just been zeroed out. So if you're looking through your listings, anything that you're not listing anymore, just delete it. Second thing that I look at is the variation type. These are just like the most common problems that people have. So variation type, check to make sure that's correct. Check the listing descriptions to make sure you're not listing things that are too different as variations. Make sure they're not bundles. And also check to make sure that you're not accidentally creating duplicates, which happens a lot. And then I usually also look at the UPCs. I mean, if it's your listing, you probably know if it's a real GS1 UPC or not. But if you don't, like if you're a reseller and somebody else put that barcode on there, you want to check that against the Get-Here database with GS1 to see who that barcode belongs to.
That's worth to live by.
Is there a situation where someone might violate ASIN variation policy on purpose? Like, is there a possible, like,
yeah.
We saw that last year as a way of manipulating reviews.
Yeah. That's
also occasionally.
Your favorite topic,
yeah.
Liz.
Also occasionally it's a way to try to manipulate sales rank. So if you have one product that's doing well, you don't want to create a new listing. You want to make it a variation of that. So that's they're really the only cases where you would intentionally do this incorrectly.
We had somebody who said, I'm trying to increase, we were doing it. I said, well, we looked at what they were doing and we finally just said, well, why were you doing it this way? And they said, well, we're trying to increase our sales. Get more eyeballs on our product. Yeah, I guess that's a straightforward answer.
Well, and I guess maybe that's why Amazon is enforcing this now, is because people were doing this to manipulate another part of the system or to get some sort of benefit by abusing this particular, which, I mean, with the millions and millions of products on Amazon, they want the listings to be correct, right? I mean, that's
right.
Well, clutter.
They've streamlined the reporting process for this as well. Like now reporting it through brand registry is a lot more straightforward than reporting it through seller support.
Right.
So I think a lot of the enforcement we're seeing now, because we've been getting a lot of cases around the same brands. Like within a week, we'll get 5 new cases all for the same brand of listings for ASIN variation misuse. So I think it's actually the brands that are starting to report this. And then obviously sellers reporting sellers, as we see lots of.
Yeah, brands are getting more involved in understanding this and reporting things not matching and reporting them as infringements sometimes. You know, you start getting other kinds of accusations flying around. So it's just better to avoid all that and do it right the first time.
Absolutely. Well, so if you've got questions about whether or not you're safe in this particular arena, are your ASIN variations on the up and up, or are you going to get a letter or worse from Amazon? Contact these guys. They will look at your stuff. They will make sure that you're in compliance. Read the TOS. We'll post some links in the YouTube description of where the many different places you need to memorize and bookmark to be compliant. And we'll see you guys really soon for the next in our series of compliance. Do it. Be compliant.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
I like that title.
Nice talking to you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.